What's up, LEGO builders? Welcome back to Coconut Brick Studios for a LEGO Star Wars Mock Challenge that's the first of its kind here on the channel. I am going to recreate the 6 coolest cities in the Star Wars galaxy as LEGO Star Wars Mocs. Here to help me today, I have this handy little Star Wars locations book. It has some really cool cross-section illustrations of different places around the galaxy and a very cursed picture of Jar Jar. There's no time limit or price limit on this one today. I figured recreating the cities accurately would be enough of a challenge. But I'm sure you're interested to see how I'm gonna pull this off, so execute order 66 on that like button and let's get started. First up is one of the cities I was the most excited to build, the capital city of Theed. All of these mocks are going to be built in microscale because I figured that would be the best way to capture a more complete looking mock, and there's no way I could do this in a much larger scale for 6 Star Wars cities. I'm going to make the base and add a black frame, then start building up with green brick since the city is located on the edge of some high cliffs with water below. I'm going to add the 2 waterfalls we see on the left of the palace as well. As I'm editing this, I realized adding a bunch of trans-clear studs at the bottom would have looked a lot cooler and been more accurate, but it's too late for that now. Now for the fun part, building the city. I was most excited to build the large palace building and the round towers at the edge of the cliff. The city to me looks like a jumble of buildings with a large road running up to the palace, so I'm going to mark out the road next and then fill all around it with the buildings. They're going to be made up of mostly round pieces of varying widths and heights. I basically just bought a bunch of sand green and tan greebling pieces that look like a good roof wall or some kind of building or structure in the mock, and I'm going to experiment and see what looks good and what works. There's also a large river running through the city, so I'll add that as well. Sprinkled in between the buildings are some green 1x1 studs. These are to represent trees, bushes, or any other kind of greenery, which was pretty prevalent in the city. With its pointed spires and elegant buildings perched atop a high cliff, surrounded by waterfalls, Theed looks like a castle straight out of myth or legend. The tan and sand green really complement each other and create a very unique color palette for the city. I'm really happy with how this mock turned out. I was able to include a lot of recognizable features, such as the main palace with the statues outside, triumphal arch, and the river that runs through the city. The LEGO Harry Potter line really came in clutch with this one, as I think it's the reason there's this much variety of parts in sand green. I definitely want to keep this one built for a while and put it on display. Next is one we all know and love, Tipoca City on Camino. I have another black base and frame and I'm going to fill it with trans blue cylinders. Tipoca City is built on top of a stormy ocean, and I want to represent that by adding in waves. I'm going to add 1x1 round plates under some of the cylinders to make them taller than the surrounding ones and create somewhat of a ripple effect on the water. I'm going to leave some areas flat, and we'll come back later and add in some 1x1 plates on top to break up those flat areas. Now it's time to build the city. It is made up of a series of huge discs which I'm going to recreate using some radar dishes. I stuck a half peg and a 2x2 round brick inside one of the dishes, which allowed me to connect them together and create an alien saucer looking shape. These are going to be held up by some support pillars of light bluish gray 1x1 cylinders, and because there are no exposed studs on the bottom of the UFOs, they're just going to have to rest on top of the pillars. I just need one last build, and that is a tiny Venator. Because this mock is so simple looking on a micro scale, I wanted to add a ship of some kind, and what better one to do than the Venator. It isn't built to scale with the buildings, I just made it as small as I could. While very simple and easy to build, I really like how this mock turned out. The small discs paired with the larger ones gives everything a nice sense of scale, minus the massive Venator hovering above it all. I was interested to see how the waves would look, considering it's very hard to create such dynamic fluid shapes, especially in microscale, but I think the studs and cylinders do a good job of making everything look choppy. I even added a small group of Iwas, I think is how you call them, the winged things that Obi-Wan uses to get around on Camino. Building this Camino mock and seeing it finish made me want to build a larger scale Camino, but when that happens, I think of all the trans blue cylinders I would need to place down and I get flashbacks of Kid Onemoidia cloud work. This next one may strike a nostalgic chord for many of you, I know it did for me. I'm building good old Utapau, specifically Pau City. This was a fun trip down memory lane for me with a new twist, because pretty much all my Utapau mocks in the past focus on the entrance to the city where all the battles and action happens. But this time I'm delving deeper in and building the actual city. Starting with the cliff wall, and at the top I'm going to add in a series of tiny landing platforms. They're going to be open topped as they're way too small to add those bone awnings. On either side I'm adding pillars which will support the roof and walls along the back. Once again, I really struggled to build buildings inside because the cross-section book just shows a mass of weird structures and shapes, and it's really hard to pinpoint specific buildings and an overall architectural style for Utapau. So I'm just going to make it up as I go. I'll try to make it look as alien as possible with lots of spikes and claws. Once all that is done, I'll add the roof and continue the rock wall above, leaving a hole in the middle to let in light to illuminate the buildings. I ended up with a pretty cool looking city. I added a lot of different colored studs to represent aliens, people, and boxes, with some little ships docked docked on various landing pads at the front. In the center, I put a giant crystal under a bone archway to fill up space and make it feel like this was some kind of grand entranceway to the rest of the city, which is behind the archway at the back. The buildings have large flat sections where people can walk out on and enjoy the view over the city and out into the large hole everything resides in. Someday, I'm going to return to Utapau on a large scale, and I will make it my goal to really recreate the buildings accurately and add those awesome bone awnings we see above a lot of the landing platforms. I'm not sure this place is actually a city or more of a factory or plant of some kind, but I'm building the large structure we see on Mustafar and Revenge of the Sith. I mean, the locals gotta live somewhere, right? The main things I gotta recreate are the lava falls and rivers that dominate this planet. I saw two coming out of this place, so I will have one back behind the other and they will converge into one flow at the bottom of the Moc. I don't have a lot of footage of this coming together because I'm using a lot of black brick which reflects the light and throws off the exposure of my camera and makes the footage look really bad. But above the lava falls is where the actual structure is going to be. I'm going to add in a bunch of random pieces as greebling, such as skis and little minifig saws to match all the weird stuff we see jutting out of the falls and rocks. This was another tough one to see in the cross sections book because so much was cut away to show the inside, but since I was building so small I didn't have to worry about accuracy. The lava falls turned out better than I expected, as well as the river, but the buildings are just so-so. I added the skis to represent whatever these are supposed to be. I added a couple of dark bluish gray bits above all that to make it seem like there was a whole network of caves and rooms inside the rock and to add some more detail. I am all too familiar with this next one as I'm currently trying to build it on a much larger scale, the planet city of Coruscant. There's so many different places and skylines to build on Coruscant, so I specifically picked the Senate District with the Galactic Senate building at its center, with dark bluish gray roads leading out from it in different directions. In the different squares, I'm going to add the skyscrapers and other buildings. I'm going to build a bunch of tall, narrow shapes out of plate and tile, and add those in for the skyscrapers and add in some cheese slopes and ingot pieces to create smaller structures on the base level. Even though these Mocs are small, all this building is starting to weigh on me, and this Moc is making that apparent. I feel like it's a little bit too simple, but at the same time it's Coruscant, so there isn't a whole lot I can do except add more buildings. The Senate building was super easy as it looks like a giant mushroom, so I just placed down a wheel with a radar dish on top of it. After I finished building the ground level, I wanted to raise up the section where the buildings are above the road to break up the ground level and make it look more interesting, but I just barely trimmed my nails and they are already torn up from taking apart and building so many Mocs, so I couldn't do it. But I think you get the idea of what this is supposed to be when you look at the Moc. I finally made it to the last one, and this was the other city I was really excited and pumped to build. Otoh Gunga, Jar Jar's old stomping grounds. I have wanted to build this Moc on a large scale for a long time, but this might be one of the most challenging places to build considering the whole thing is deep underwater and is made up of a series of massive bubble-shaped structures. I'm once again using radar dishes, and this time they are clear to represent the bubbles. The biggest one is going to be open in the middle to be able to fit everything inside. The interior has some smaller dish rooms and raised platforms for the Gungans to walk around on. On the floor of the giant lake that the city resides in, I'm adding more bubbles as external hangars and storage areas. Man, this is such a cool place. With the Gungans being my favorite alien race, I have wanted to build their city of Otoh Gunga for a long time. And as far as I know, this is the only Otoh Gunga Moc out there on the internet right now. Behind the city, the terrain slopes up to the surface, and this is where Qui-Gon, Obi-Wan, and Jar Jar jump in. All the little studs represent Gungans, and I even added a large 1x2 tile to represent the giant Fumbas that they use to bear their shield generators. I put some of the studs on clear pieces to make it look like some of the Gungans were swimming around outside. I have been fascinated with micro-scale builds and have been wanting to make some kind of video with them for a long time now, so this was a fun challenge. It was also nice to build some more complete Mocs, as most of my challenge videos are just a small section of something much larger. As I was putting all this together, I realized the Mustafar one is probably a factory of some kind and not a city, so replace that with my Cato Nemoidia Moc for the 6 coolest Star Wars cities. Of all the builds, Theed is definitely my favorite, with Kamino being a close second, but don't forget to let me know which one you like the best, as well as what cities you would have included, and I will catch you next time, but until then, happy building.